A good rule to follow is the larger the project, the more time you'll need for planning and design. The next part of once you get through planning and design, the next part is permitting. And that can really be a toss up. It depends on your local jurisdiction. I've had projects permitted in a week, which is very, very difficult to achieve. And some that could take months. It could be 12 months and 24 months if there's a lot of entitlements and setbacks, throughout the process. So depending on your location, I'd say 1 to 4 months is a good gauge. But if you're in a state like California where you have to go through CEQA, that could definitely add a year plus, a year to 18 months. So it's really important to understand and engage those, and really to have like an architect on board that can help guide on what the permitting timelines will be. Second would be for construction, smaller remodels, 2 to 6 months, depending how extensive they are. If you're doing like a full floor, 6 to 12 months. And then if it's a full school renovation phase, multiple buildings, 12 to 36 months. So really the scale is what's really important. So I would say a realistic time frame would be anywhere from 1 year minimum to 3+ years, depending on the scope and size of the project.
Yeah. Yeah, and that depending, right, is the operative word there. And even with sort of these ideal conditions in mind, it seems like one of the things I hear you say a lot is plan for delays, right? Like assume that delays are going to happen. So given what you just shared, what are the common reasons that school construction projects experience delays, and how can schools plan for those?
Yeah, there's all types of unknowns that could be encountered during a project. So just some things that immediately come to mind that I've experienced would be academic calendar restrictions. So if you can only do construction in the summer months or the winter break, that's definitely limiting. So that could be a factor. One thing also to consider is the long lead time for construction of materials. It's mainly HVAC equipment, electrical switchgear, windows, and things like that. It has come down. The lead times have come down a lot since during the pandemic. But some of those items, if you're only doing a 2-month renovation project, but you need new switchgear and HVAC, that could be 8 months out. So to identify that and try to plan for that accordingly. Slow permitting or state approvals, that's a big unknown unless you have an architect that's gone through a similar project or a contractor that can help guide you and give you some realistic timelines. For larger cities, I've seen a lot that the backlog and the shortage of plan reviewers can really be a hindrance to the project, as well as having to go through and submit multiple versions and submittals of the drawings. And you just keep getting stuck in this point where you do some fixes and comments that the city gives you for the drawings. You have to resubmit. They find more things, and it could be 3, 4, 5, 6 submissions before you finally get that approval. So that adds a lot of time. Other things would be stakeholder-driven design changes. So whether if it's the school, the owner, or whatever party that's involved that's making design decisions, if you make decisions and change things late in the process, that could also delay things. When you do a renovation as well, there's a lot of unknowns of what's behind the walls, and you don't necessarily know until you start construction or you do some investigation, open up some walls, which could be tricky to do if the school's out in operation. But that's a big unknown is, let's say if there's asbestos in the walls you didn't know about, wiring issues, foundation issues, and just things that you don't know until you start construction. Some other key things would be labor shortages during the summer. Summer's peak construction time. And if you're not planning early, there's a chance that a lot of the labor from subcontractors could all be devoted somewhere else. So it's important to plan early. Lastly, it would just be slow decision-making and poor coordination among the team members. And that could be anybody that makes up the design team, the school, the owner, the architect, and consultant. So trying to make sure everyone stays on track and promptly makes decisions to move the project forward are very important.
Yeah. Speaking of architects and opening up walls and things like that, at what point in the timeline should schools begin working with people like architects and contractors?
I'd say as early as possible. The moment that your school says, hey, like I need extra room, I need a gym, I need any type of facility, it's immediately try to get outside help, get an architect, a consultant, someone on board to kind of help guide the project. I'd say it's never too early to start, or I would say it's ideal to start a year ago, but start as early as you can just to make sure you have enough time for the planning process.
Okay. And that planning process includes things like permitting, which you mentioned earlier, which can take, it sounds like all over the map, different amounts of time. You gave a really rapid one, but sometimes it takes longer. How can you avoid a delay when it comes to getting that permitting in place?
Yeah, so I think the best methods to avoid permitting delays is just having a really strong design set from the architect when you go in to have like peer review. So that's a process where not only the architect, but you'll hire outside consultants, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, civil, just different groups to do a review of the drawings and get an outside perspective to say these are issues that may be encountered with the design, constructability, as well as trying to just tighten everything up for permitting to have as few comments come back as possible. I think that the biggest delay and the biggest killer for the timeline is having to submit multiple rounds of submittals to the city when you're trying to get a drawing approved. Ideally, there's one, a minimum of one, but if it continues to drag on, and I've done projects where we've had to go back 6 times. We do an update, submit, and then it's gone back and forth 6 times, and that can definitely take a lot. So really having a really well put together, really well thought out drawing set can definitely help save time. One other aspect to add would be it really depends on like how complicated and how large the building department may be, but permit expediters can also help if they have relationships with those with the city officials and the plan reviewers. So that could also be another avenue. For smaller building departments, typically not needed. Usually the architect and contractor can, but if it's a really large municipality, large cities with large building departments, it could be important to have a permit expediter on your team as well.
Okay. Yeah, really great advice. Last question for you. And this is sort of something that will leave school leaders thinking about what phases of construction take longer than, the school leaders that you've worked with, longer than maybe what would be expected. Like, where do snags come up? What are some kind of pain points when it comes to that longer than anticipated?
Sure. Yeah, I would say that really the pre-construction process is the area that you could have a lot of hiccups and delays. And by pre-construction, I mean everything that happens before you start construction and mobilize to site. So that's design and permitting, which we've talked a bunch about. But I would say that some key items would be really just some things I mentioned before, like design and stakeholder engagement. So it's really important to have a team identified as early on as possible. If if you're trying to open up a school, let's say 2 years, and you don't have an architect or contractor, that engagement process of finding the architect, finding the contractor, that could be 6 months to do like a competitive bid process for the architect and to try to identify that. So if you already have somebody that would be a good team member, that can definitely help expedite things. Some other things that could definitely take longer is if you have to do a phased construction. That's where, let's say you have a school that's occupied and you need to, keep it in operation, but you have to shut down one half of the building, or if it's 2 stories, one floor to do construction. That definitely, it's a solution, but it does end up taking longer overall, and it does end up costing more because the contractor's a little bit more slowed down and constrained. So that's an area where if you really have to keep the school operating while you're under construction, it just takes a lot more planning and will end up taking longer overall and more costly just because of the slowdown and efficiencies. Maybe just the last two things I'll note is there could be a lot of unknowns when it comes to like site investigation. If when you do an environmental report that there is a historical use of, let's say, like a gas station or an automobile shop, a repair shop that may have a lot of pollutants in the ground, that could hold up your project if you have to do, ESA phase 1, 2, 3, and then get special investigations to determine, what's in your soil and potentially remediate it. Could be a very long and costly process. So to understand those prior uses up front can definitely be important. Last thing I'll mention is utility upgrades and locations. Recently did a project where we had a lot of issues identifying the underground utilities, and that ended up holding up the design because we weren't able to figure out where all the utilities were and the sizing so that information could be fed to the civil engineer to be able to get all of the information for permitting. If there's information like that's left off, it's going to hold up permitting. The city is going to ask for what are your pipe sizes, is there adequate flow for the sewer to exit the site. So and being able to identify the underground utilities and make sure, and then this is really more for new construction. And if you're like building something new, but that could be an issue as well that could slow up the project.
Yeah, all good reasons to have the right team in place, right? Who can navigate all of those challenges with you. So yeah, really, really great insights, Michael. I want to thank you for all of what you shared today. We're here like once again Tuesdays, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, for 10 minutes or so, discussing biggest challenges facing school leaders. For those of you watching, you can learn more about strategic facility planning, construction projects, get more resources from Michael himself. Just head over to growschools.com and check out our resource library. So thanks again to Michael and to everyone who joined us today, and we will see you next time.
All right. Thank you, everyone.